My next guest is Jared Ray. And if you've ever wondered what your dreams meant, what the purpose of dreams are, then you're going to want to stay tuned for this episode. He's a dream expert and he's a Jungarian depth coach. So this episode was so intriguing to me because we went into the psyche of what dreams mean, not only from a spiritual perspective, but from a clinical perspective. What does the data show? Why do we dream? Why do we have collective dreams? What does it mean when I have a dream about my ex? So if you want to learn more about what your dreams mean, why you dream, then stay tuned for this episode. Jared, welcome to Diary of an Empath. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to talk.
I found your page randomly. I think you were talking about dream work. And one thing that I like about you, you're a life coach, but I love how you interpret psychology and I love how you interpret philosophy. And I think that's what attracted me to your page when I first found you. But I would love to learn a little bit more about you. If you had to define your mission and why you do what you do, how would you define that?
Yeah, I love this question because it makes me remember and think about it. I was an alcoholic, or I am an alcoholic. I'm sober for 6 years this month and from alcohol. And when I found what helped me to stay what I would call spiritually connected, or it's like psychic hygiene, what really helped me was just to think about and focus on helping other people. And so I sort of just, my mission became help the expansion of consciousness. It's something that actually took me a while to get to because I needed something, an umbrella mission statement in a sense to encompass everything I do, because I do all sorts of things. And so for me, adding to the stream of life, adding to the unfolding of the universe or to consciousness instead of limiting it or taking away from that expansion. In simpler terms, it's just like helping people, and whatever that means at whatever given time, that's my goal, is to be of service to something greater than myself.
I just did an episode. Oh my God, her name is literally on the tip of my tongue. But we talked about sober curiousness, and she came up with the term sober curious. And the conversation was really interesting because I feel like we're kind of coming to an era where people are starting to understand that alcohol is a toxin. We have a society that alcohol is just the norm, right? If you don't drink, people are like, why? Like, that's kind of weird. I'm curious for you, like, if I look back at your childhood, what is the pivoting point that I need to understand about you to understand about your journey and how you got to where you are, especially with your soberness?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I don't spend a ton of time in my past, unlike a lot of, let's say, trauma-focused therapies and stuff like that, which I'm totally a huge fan of and spend a lot of time in those fields. But like my brain just kind of doesn't work like that. But when I have looked back, I grew up Mormon, LDS,
Really?
and very, very strict family. So essentially, I think there was an aspect of not being able to be myself and feeling that if I was myself, I'd be exiled from the community, which biologically is death in a way.
Yep.
So for me, it was like conform or die. And so when I found drugs, like I found lore tabs when I had not until I was 18. Thank God I didn't find it in high school, to be honest with you. And I didn't even know people did drugs in high school. I was like, oh, that's what they did in the 70s or something. But I found that's how in a bubble I lived, you know. And so I found out my friends were all doing drugs. I was like, what the hell? You guys should have let me join in on this. Anyway, it quickly became like, oh, I can be myself if I'm on these drugs. And that shifted into the easiest accessible thing, which was alcohol. And meaning like I could just buy that. I didn't have to, It wasn't illegal. It wasn't, like I wouldn't be nervous about it. So when I moved to New York City from Salt Lake City, and when I got to New York when I was 20 years old, I just started drinking a lot. And And so that's kind of like, I think it felt like I could be myself finally. And that's really where this, what I would call the addiction kind of came from, was the trauma of not being able to be myself. I call it like developmental trauma in a sort of way. And so that, on top of how I had a bone infection in my right arm for 3 years, I almost lost my arm. And so there was also the excuses of like pain medication and all these different things. And I say excuses, it was very necessary. I was in a lot of pain, and like, but it just sort of got really confusing morally to me in a way because of the need of it. And anyway, I could go on forever, and I have to stop and mention that I'm having hardcore deja vu right now, which I haven't had in a long time, and that's really interesting. It's exciting for me. But I think, is that kind of what you meant by that question?
Yeah.
And or are you curious where it shifted into sobriety too?
I think it can be whatever we want it to be, right? I think that's your story. And that's really what I'm trying to understand is your story. But I'm curious for you, when you go into this understanding and really starting to explore the sober curiousness, how do you not become that diagnosis, right? Because like when you come to this understanding of like, okay, I have an alcohol addiction or I have an addiction problem, and now I'm starting to, I don't know, gain spiritual awakenings or starting to understand more. How do you not become part of that diagnosis and separate yourself from that?
Yeah, this is a complicated question, to be honest, because like, for instance, I got sober through 12 steps because I tried for years to quit. And I found that I had no control, specifically just over alcohol and nicotine as well. It will possess my psyche, like a full-on possession where Jared's no longer there. It's the drug utilizing my body to consume more of it. And it's very terrifying. So there's an aspect of my relationship to alcohol that it's like, I'm free from that addiction. I don't think about alcohol. I have wine in my fridge for anyone that wants it. It's been in there for like 3 years. People don't, it's catching on, right? Like people don't like to drink as much. But I still identify as being alcoholic. And I struggled with this because it felt limiting to me. It felt like I was always sick and unhealed and that I will always be the broken person. And so for many years, I sort of battled with this, and I've come to the realization that it's part of what I've sort of extracted as purpose and meaning in my life is that I've stared this darkness in its face, and that scarred me in a sort of way, and it allows me to be of service and help because I understand this darkness in a way. I can hold space for people that are being consumed by it and help retrieve their consciousness back out of it. And there's this identity to having been there that I won't let go of, but it doesn't limit me. Like, so rather than being like, oh, I'm broken, it's like, no, this is pointing me towards my purpose and meaning in the community and in the I call it the organism that is our species or our earth. And so for me, it was more about shifting my perspective of like the diagnoses or the label. And this was the same thing with like ADHD. I was diagnosed with ADHD. Same. I don't consider myself ADHD anymore. I think of it as a style of preference for perceiving information that isn't cohesive with the style of learning that is in the establishment. And again, a shift in my perspective was like, oh, this is a superpower that, yes, I need to learn how to hone in on certain things so I can interface with reality, with like society. But that was really limiting for me to be like, oh, I can't read books. I had to get to a point where I was like, oh no, I just don't care about any of these books. And if I really want to, I will read that paragraph 7 times until I get it. And that's what I started doing, was reading paragraphs 7 times. And now I understand them really deeply now because I've read the paragraph 7 times.
I'm giggling because that's my life. Like, I know that these are the things I struggle with. I relate a lot to the feeling kind of like, I don't know if it's like a more of an out of place or just feeling different from the norm, right? But being able to camouflage in certain situations. And like when I was younger, a lot of substance use, I relate a lot to your story. You know, for you, like when you think about the idea of not feeling like you fit in, how do you get to that place of acceptance of just either, hey, accepting the fact that you're not like the norm, right? Or accepting that this is who I am? Because I feel like a lot of people struggle with that idea of I'm not like my family. I don't relate to certain people. I have this diagnosis and I don't know how to relate to the world. How do you start to come to an acceptance of, yeah, maybe you are different? Or is it just something that we're overthinking about? What are your thoughts on that?
I could talk for 2 days about this concept, because for me, it's about ego, and not in a bad or like negative or positive way. This is in context of like the psychology that I use, Carl Jung's perspective, I've really resonated with. It's like, just to quickly preface this, I read Jung because as I'm reading him, I'm like, yes, I've experienced this and I like the classification that you have. It's not that I'm learning it and then experiencing it through his framework. It's that I'm like, I've been looking for a framework for my experience, and it really resonates the way he classifies certain phenomena. And so that being said, the ego is like my sense of self, my perspective on reality. And I believe that there is a lack of personality development supported by the way our society is developing. And so there's an extra need to fortify our sense of self. And so there's an extra need to be different, if this makes sense. So diagnoses and sort of like, you see this on social media, hardcore with the younger generations who are like putting their diagnoses as their bio, right? This is their identity. And this is very much so, I think, because there is a lack of personality development, not on anyone's, it's not their fault, for instance. It's difficult. It's difficult. And I think younger and younger people want to be individuated in a sort of way. So this is an important aspect of this question, because I grew up feeling very different than everybody. I felt like I was very either special or like an outcast. And it sort of, with the ego, a sense of self needs to differentiate itself from others. And so it will do that by being better than them or worse than them. Egoism can go in either direction. If you hate yourself, that's just as egoic as if you are completely full of yourself. And they often actually polarize back and forth. Like, I had an experience on the subway in New York once where I was like one day I'm like, everyone thinks I'm the hottest shit in here. Like, I'm so cool. And then the next day I'm hungover and I'm like, everyone hates me, you know? No one's thinking about me. That's also what alcoholism and drug addiction turns into. It's just a self-centeredness. But so this was an interesting transition, because I do feel like I'm different. And it turned into, rather than being super unique, it was like, I'm an artist. And I started to look at, as I was studying Jung's typology too, there's a distribution of, like a natural distribution of values within society. Meaning you're born with a sort of preference for what kind of information you like to deal with and what your criteria for making judgments is. And it sort of distributes to establish like a really successful system of evolution in a sort of way. And so I see the artists as being a small portion of the population. Artists are not going to fit in. They're going to be pushing the envelope, pushing the status quo, and oftentimes they get rejected and fail. And there's not a lot of these people who I would say are like on the edge of what is known and what is not known, or like I would even say like you could say like the psychonauts, the people that are exploring the psyche and pushing further and further into the unknown are, if everyone was like that, our civilization would have fallen apart a long time ago. Because we're not interested in establishing I'm not interested in establishing status quo, and like I'm not interested in upholding traditions. I like to break traditions. I like to start new things and pave new paths. If everyone was an explorer, we'd all just be wandering around. And,
are you an Aquarius?
Me, but like,
I'm just curious. Are you an Aquarius?
No. I have dated many Aquariuses,
okay,
and they probably have influenced
maybe
me. I'm curious why you asked that.
Well, Aquariuses are very forward thinking. They want to break the status quo. And even if you're not an Aquarius, I wonder if it's somewhere in your chart. This is totally off topic, and I don't mean to get you off your flow. But I bet you if I look in your chart, and I'm happy to do that for you on the side, by the way, after, if you have your birth information, I'll check for you. I'm so curious. Aquarius has got to be in your chart somewhere. That it's just very Aquarius energy. Side note. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I'm kind of dabbling in astrology. It's been really difficult for my rational brain. And I don't mean that I mean that there's like so much information and variables within astrology that like I can't find my entry point in a sort of way.
It is a lot.
Just because it's like you have to understand everything. My brain likes to understand the holistic picture, and astrology is just so big. Anyway, yeah. So I'm getting to the point that I started to identify as an artist. I identified as, instead of being broken or sick or different, I realized, I'm playing a certain part that there is people that I am similar to, right? But there's few of us, and you can start to see them, right? Like even on social media, like people that are attracted to my authenticity are typically more aligned with breaking traditions, and I don't mean like going out and like destroying churches and stuff, but I'm saying like we're interested in establishing our own spiritual beliefs and like moving into new realms of ideas, and get excited when maybe an old scientific established idea crumbles and a new one has to be born, right? And there's this so what I'm getting at is this world of people feeling different and isolated from the established social norm and certain things. It's because you're probably an artist. Like it's probably because you've got some high creativity that is seeking expression into the world, and you need to find an outlet or else it will eat you alive. And you're going to be different, and if you try to fit in, it will squash your soul, squash your life force, and then you'll get depressed. And so a lot of people are super depressed because they are trying to fit in. And the worst part is that being an artist isn't necessarily financially rewarded by our society at this point in time. But I could go into this pretty deeply, because I think that authenticity and expression of self will become a very valuable currency in the next 15 years because of AI, oversaturation of unauthenticity, and so I coach a lot of authenticity and being different and sticking out and being vulnerable, it's going to be highly valuable in our human capacity to like our authenticity meter, being able to tell when someone's being authentic, is going to be more and more tuned in and like heightened, because we're going to be bombarded by so much inauthenticity.
Did you guys know that I'm not only a therapist, but I'm also a coach and a professional tarot reader? Now, it's not exactly me hovering over a crystal ball telling your future. It's a way to connect with your guides on life issues such as career and love and spirituality. And sometimes people need one-on-one coaching to help them through breakups, toxic relationships, healing the mother wound, their spiritual path, or navigating tools as an empath. So I do all of these things to help my clients pursue life life and decisions and understand themselves. So if you are interested in one-on-one coaching or a tarot reading, click the link below to get started. Okay, back to the podcast.
That's a really interesting thing that you bring up with AI and the authenticity part of it. Because I do feel like you're right. We're not rewarded by authenticity in this society. Do you feel like social media and AI are going to play on that? How do you think that's affecting creative people and people who are trying to show up authentically? Because I feel like I am punished on my socials sometimes. You know how it is. It's very frustrating. Sometimes it's like, oh, we're doing really good. And then other times it's like, should I conform to what they're wanting so I can get the validation and the likes and the growth? Or do I stay true to myself and then sometimes get punished for it?
Right. Yeah. I think the way I work with clients is a little too complicated to get into it really quickly, but essentially you could see it as like there's an authenticity value of just wanting to be yourself, doing what is passionate and exciting for you. And then there's more of systems thinking and management that is more interested in gaining followers, gaining reach or success, climbing ladders. It's management of systems, management of resources. And this meaning, like, if I'm stressed about money, I might shift into that value system where I'm like, screw it, I'm going to make certain content that goes viral so that I can get more flow, so I can make more money. But what I've found for myself is that if my systems thinking is serving my higher value of authenticity, meaning if I can figure out how to niche into what, Instagram pushes you into niches and it will only throw certain content to your following and to new following. And so for me, it's like I've asked people, it's like, would you want to do, like, the worst thing in the world would be to do something you absolutely hate doing, have it go viral, and then create a career off of that thing that you hate. That's a perfect way to identify with persona, which is like potentially it's just a really, really bad formula for psyche and mental health. So for me, being able to sort of continue to explore new ideas, being myself, being authentic on social media, and then having certain things start to push me into niches. Like on my TikTok, it's all about my dream content will go way more viral than any of my other. And I'm talking like 1.5 million views versus like 1,200 views, right? Like it's a big difference. If I'm just talking about what I want to talk about, it's like 1,200 views. If I specifically make a systematized, like, catchy intro that I don't like doing anymore, but I used to do it to get that following, I was very much so in that mode of the systems thinking. This is a really jumbled, long way to say that I've found a way to use my systems thinking to support my authenticity. So for instance, on Instagram, my videos that go viral are all about questions. So I'll say, like, I have a question for you. What would you do if you were stuck in an eternal loop doing the same thing over and over and over again? And this tells me a lot about your values, because what you want to be stuck doing, or your answer to that question. Like, some people are like, I would never want to be stuck in a loop. And I'm like, okay, so this person doesn't like hypotheticals. And that means that they also are pragmatic and they like data, and it tells me a lot very quickly. And so these types of questions go viral, and I kept playing into it because it falls under my highest mission of helping people self-reflect, right? Like, I got lucky in a sort of way, but I tell clients and stuff, make sure that even if you have a viral video, that it's going to be really exciting, but you don't want to feed it if it's not authentic to your mission in a way. So this is it gets so much more complicated, but like being able to serve your higher vision, and that might even just be mentally stepping back to see, is this actually aiding in my goal? Because sometimes if we're too zoomed in, it might seem like it's not. But if you zoom out, it could be like, okay, so I'm going to sacrifice my exploration of content and hone in on dream work, even though I'm more authentically exploring all over the place. But still, that does fall under my vision of, aiding in the expansion of consciousness. So it's kind of like mind games in a way, or like even maybe more similar to CBT therapy or something, where I'm like changing my thinking. But that's been really helpful for me, is to sort of find the balance between, if I'm sacrificing, it better be for something that is supporting my higher vision.
So you do a lot of dream work. And I find dreams fascinating. I'm very much like you. I'm a creative, but I also have this like clinical and data driven mindset. And dreams have always fascinated me as somebody who I dabble in tarot. I do the spiritual work. I love data. I love evidence for why things happen the way that they do and why people react the way that they do. But dreams has always been kind of a question mark. And I feel like we've had a lot of therapists for so long, psychologists, hundreds of years of worth of question marks on why we have dreams. What is your interpretation of why we dream and what they mean? What should we be looking for?
Yeah, I don't know, but
Me
I think, but I think personally, the way I look at it is that we've been evolving for a very long time. Let's say hundreds of thousands of years, right? Maybe a couple million, maybe a couple billion years, whatever, depending on what I'm talking about. Like if I'm talking about humans, it's like, let's say a couple of 100,000 years or whatever. And this self-reflecting awareness that all of a sudden popped out of nowhere in a way, and it's like, oh shit, I'm a body, I'm a human, this is weird. There was a process of plain old instinctual being, meaning like we survived and evolved by being instinctual animal beings. That I call it like the instinctual mind. We were driven by the puppets, or the puppeteering of emotions, like eat food, make babies, this kind of survival, eros, and self-preservation. That these types of instincts were sort of just pulling the strings, and all of a sudden that instinctual mind birthed self-reflecting awareness in a way. It popped out of it. Whether this is like, I'm talking about the psychic experience, not like the neurological or the physical brain. I'm talking just about like, at some point we became self-aware. And by the way, that's what I think of like the mythological stories, like the fall of Adam in Christianity is very much so, becoming aware of good and evil, but in context of what I'm talking about, it's becoming aware of those instincts that are driving you and then being able to ignore one and feed another. We became conscious enough to repress instinct. And thus neuroses and mental health and all of these things became a problem, because we became capable of manipulating this evolution that had been happening for hundreds of thousands of years. So during this process, I believe that as the ego is being born, I think of it as like a mother birthing a child, and then the self-awareness grows over time into a teenager. We're like a teenager right now. The ego is like, in context of our development, is like a teenager that's like, oh shit, I get it, I know what's going on. And then it says like, thanks mother, but no thanks. And it pushes this intelligent instinctual mind away. It says like, we've got this, we're super aware, and we're going to take care of everything. So no more instinct, no more, like we're going to be civilized, and we're not going to be animals anymore.